Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Probable Magic. Tonight I need a little mental and financial break from drafting. Been drafting a lot, having a little bit of trouble with the video for round 3 of draft number 6, which is why it's not up yet. A little frustrated with that, and it's been a while since we visited my other series, Drawing on Probability, and let's do that. So this is Drawing on Probability, episode number 2. We're going to look at creating a probability of draw frequency distribution. I can't spell frequency. Frequency with an E. Okay, so that's a mouthful, but not that difficult. Basically a graph. So last time on Drawing on Probability, we created this probability of draw table. And if you recall, with this table, we examined the probability of drawing card type A out of a deck that consisted of cards A and not A. And the example that we used was lands and not lands, or not lands are also called spells. And we did it in the context of a limited 40 card deck with 17 lands, which is pretty typical. And we broke it down in terms of looking at drawing land number 1, which is the first land we draw, land number 2, etc., by draw step. Now we want to look at the frequency distribution for drawing a given number of lands by a given draw step. And while that sounds confusing, it's really not. We're going to do it in a very familiar context, which is our opening hand. Our opening hand usually consists of 7 cards, but if we mulligan, it's going to become smaller. So for a given hand size, and just for kicks, we'll look at the ridiculous case of mulliganing all the way down to 1. How many lands are we likely to get in that hand size? So for a 7 card hand, what percentage of the time will we get 1 land, or 2 lands, or 3 lands, etc. So, before we can graph it, we need to tweak this data a little bit. So we're going to, off to the side here, build a little subchart. And as I said, I'm doing this in the context of opening hand, but there's no reason why we have to stop at 7 cards. We could, if we wanted to look at how many lands we're likely to have drawn by turn number 9, or whatever you think an average game length is, we could do that with 7 plus that many turns worth of draw steps. But for tonight, let's keep it simple and look at hands. So I'm going to look at hand size from 1 to 7, and then number of lands, and we want to include the case of 0 lands, and the maximum we could get in our 7 card opening hand is 7 lands. So, if you recall from the last video, and I realize it's been a while, we said one of the things you can do with this table is if you were to sum up several rows, like say we sum up from draw steps 1 to 4 on land 2, the sum of those percentages, which is 17, 23 is 40, it's about 61%. There's a 61% that by draw 4, we will have 2 or more lands. So that's useful, and that's what we're going to use in making this chart, this new chart on hand size. But here, we don't want to know 2 or more. We want to know exactly that many, exactly 2. Well, we can get at that by looking at the probability of getting 2 or more and subtracting from it the probability of getting 3 or more. And if we take the difference between those, that will be exactly 2. So actually, we're going to go back here. We'll start at 7. Again, just to make our formulas clean, we will go ahead and look at 8, even though we know across the board there is no chance of us getting 8 or more lands in a 7-card opening hand. But by putting the formula in, we can copy it across and not have to adjust it. And again, we need to lock the top cell, the top row of this sum range, so that when we drag it down, it will increase for range. And there should be some probability of getting 7 cards. There we go. It's rounding to 0. On a hand size of 6 or less, probability of getting 7 lands should be exactly 0. It looks like it is. Now, let's drag this all the way back to there. And I don't care about the decimal point. There. Now, I didn't drag it onto 0. We didn't look at 0 in our chart here. For getting 0, we have to make one adjustment because it wasn't in our chart, but we know that the probability of getting 0 or more lands in our opening hand is 100%. 0 or more covers the entire spectrum. So we drag this here, I can delete that and just put a 1 in for 100%, and drag that down. And now, from our very useful probability of draw table, we have a frequency distribution table that shows for a hand size of 1, there's a 58% chance of getting 0 lands and a 43% chance of getting 1 land. That we can figure out very easily from this as well. But what's more useful is to look here at our 7-card opening hand, and you can see the distribution of how many lands we are likely to get in that opening hand. And each time we take a mulligan, we can just go up 1 row to 1 card smaller on our hand size and see that distribution. Now, this is useful as a table, but what really helps us to see this is when we put it in a graph. So let us do that. always find graphing with this version of Excel gets a little weird on me. Select data to switch the columns and rows, and remove that. And there we go. So we have our, let's go ahead and make this a little bigger, for perhaps too big. Okay, you know what, let's just move it to a new sheet. There, that's better. So across the x-axis here we have our hand size, and then we have the probability on the y-axis here, and the colors represent the number of lands. So here in our 7-card opening hand we see this distribution. There is a 7. We can't really see it. If you remember from a few moments ago, it was 0.1, so it's there, just really hard to see. So one of the things very useful to do with this is to look at, for a given hand size, the mode. The mode is the number that comes up the most frequently, which we can identify here as the tallest line. So we see with our 40-card deck, 17 lands, the mode for a 7-card hand is 3 lands. So the result that we expect to see most frequently is a 3-land opening hand. That's just slightly edging out a 4-land opening hand. And if we mulligan, the mode is still a 3-land opening hand as the most likely result. In fact, if you say, I want my opening hand to have exactly 3 lands in it, our best chances of getting that are to mulligan to 6, because that's where we see the highest line on this blue color for 3 lands. One of the things we can note from mulliganing, though, is for the second most likely, at 7 cards, we're most likely to see 3, followed closely by 4 lands, and then 2. When we mulligan to 6, we're still most likely to see 3 lands in our opening hand, but now we are more likely to see 2 lands than 4 lands. And if we mulligan a second time down to 5-card hand, we are now more likely to get a 2-land opening hand than a 3-land opening hand. So this is one of the interesting things we can do with our probability of draw table. And by no means should you try to use something like this as your sole consideration when mulliganing. As you know, there are a lot of factors that go into whether or not to mulligan, but this just provides a little bit of context on number of lands in your opening hand and how that can affect some of your decisions. And I think this is very relevant for M14, at least in my opinion, because in M14 there's not a lot of good 2-drops. So your curve really kind of starts at 3. You'll have a couple 2-drops, but in many of the decks that I've found, my curve is a little bit higher, which makes it very important to try to hit that turn 3 land drop on time. If you miss your third land, there's often the case that there's not much you can do. So having at least 3 in your opening hand is, for me, very reassuring. Gives me a lot more confidence in that opening hand. Many times, at least in M14, I think I would rather have 3 lands in my opening hand and no playable spell, and hope to draw into a spell knowing that I'll have the mana to cast it. And color matters. I'm kind of ignoring that here, but not entirely. But I'd rather know I have the 3 lands in my opening hand, especially if I have my 2 main colors, one of each, then keep a 2 land opening hand with some good playable cards, hoping to draw into that 3rd land. I've done it. I have a history of keeping risky hands, and sometimes it pays off and sometimes it doesn't. But in M14, I think it's preferable to have the 3 in your opening hand. So one of the things I can get from this chart is knowing that I'm not jeopardizing my chances of that too badly by mulliganing down to 6. If I don't like the opening hand, I can mulligan to 6 and still have a reasonable chance of getting my 3 lands in my opening hand. Once I take that second mulligan down to 5, I'm starting to really jeopardize getting my 3 lands. And it's worth noting that 3 or more, it works, and we can get that in this graph by adding the height of the bars together. So this has been Modonomics. This has not been Modonomics. This has been drawing on probability. I've done a lot of Modonomics. I haven't done a lot of drawing on probability. This has been drawing on probability number 2. I hope this has been of value to you. Next time, whenever next time should be, we're going to expand on this further. The simplifying assumption that's been made so far is that we have A and not A, and we have these 17 lands, and we don't care what they are. But usually we're not playing a monocolor deck in limited draft. I know you can. I know there's, at least in M14, a good mono black deck, and I think a lot of people are starting to look at mono green, and I think mono blue might even be a thing. But typically we're playing 2 colors, or 2 in a splash. So next time we're going to look at taking our A category and breaking that into 2 groups. So whenever that should be, I will see you then. This has been Drawing on Probability. Good night.